When people think of low tier characters, they automatically think that that means they're bad. Well, I'm here to prove to you that they're not bad. In fact, low tier characters can actually be really great characters or memorable for all the right reasons, even if they have to work harder for what they need to do. So, with that in mind, let's talk about some of the best low tier characters in fighting games. And we're starting off with the weirdest one possible, Q from Street Fighter 3. I could not have thought of a very I could not have thought of a weirder character than this. Q is definitely a character that exists. His backstory? Uh, I'll get back to you on that one. It has been several years since the release of Street Fighter 3, and nobody even knows what Q is. So, how does Q play? Well, Q plays like Ganondorf, in the sense that he is super strong, strong as a truck, but he has the grace to match. He has the slowest movement speed out of any character in the game. Now, this is where I get to talk about why low tier characters are some of the best characters. First off, Q is not just memorable for being one of the worst characters in the game. No, that's 12's whole thing. I mean, Q is memorable for being this enigma, this character that no one can seem to figure out. Sometimes he stomps on your head, other times he cries. It's weird. His end screens don't even say what he's all about. In fact, he doesn't say anything. Aside from Necro, Q may be the weirdest character in Street Fighter. But another reason why people love Q is his taunt. You see, in Street Fighter 3, Capcom tried to make it so that taunting would change your character in a significant way. For Q, taunting increases his health. For reference, Q has an average health bar with below average health. But if he taunts, he can actually increase how much damage he can take, going from 112 to around 2000 something. I don't remember the exact numbers, but trust me, it can get pretty ridiculous. He can taunt up to 3 times, and by the third time, he becomes almost as ridiculous as the high health characters such as Urian, Gil, or Hugo. In fact, one of Q's greatest moments was when the greatest Q player in the world was able to defeat the best Makoto player in the world. For reference, Makoto and Q normally ends with Makoto utterly destroying Q. It's one of Q's worst matchups. But with enough taunts, Q becomes annoying to defeat. Q is a great example of just because you have some really bad matchups doesn't mean you're a bad character. Q is memorable for all the right reasons. Q would even later be referenced in Street Fighter V as G. Now, if we can only find out what the heck Q even is. For whatever he is, I'll get back to you on that one. But it is heavily implied that Q is a mind-controlled person controlled by G. But even that's just a guess. We don't know for sure. They're related, we just don't know. Have any ideas? Let me know in the comments below. But yes, Q is our first character. Let's move on to someone a little more interesting. Well, here's something I never thought I would say. But our next low tier is Thanos from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Yes, Thanos is one of the weakest characters in this game. Let that sink in. Thanos, a character so strong that he's able to snap out half the universe, is reduced to a support character. Is It's actually really funny. But yeah, Thanos, for reference, was the final boss in the original Marvel vs. Capcom, and he was the final boss in a fighting game. He was pretty much what you'd expect. But because Thanos was so powerful, they decided to nerf him in the second game. Because of this, Thanos was kind of shafted and became a secondary character, which is a little insulting considering it's Thanos. Actually, Thanos is my favorite Marvel villain, but the point I'm trying to make here is that Thanos being a support character who blows bubbles to trap your opponents is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But just because Thanos is a low tier, that doesn't mean that Thanos is a bad character. Far from it. He may be a support character, but that doesn't mean he's a bad character. His bubbles are great ways to keep the opponent guessing. And if you play as him well, he will put in the numbers. I just kind of wish that Thanos was given his accurate power level in the comics and in the movies. Though then again, in the comics, Squirrel Girl was able to canonically defeat him. Don't ask me how that happened. The comics never explain. And I think it should just stay that way. I don't have much to say on Thanos, but the fact that he's just a support character who blows bubbles in this game is just too funny to mention. But there is another low tier character from a Marvel vs. Capcom game that I think is a lot more interesting, who we shall talk about right now. Phoenix Wright from Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Phoenix Wright is a bit of a crazy character. First of all, what is he even doing here? I think his inclusion into a game like this is just ridiculously hilarious. But what's even funnier is the fact that, well, in context, Phoenix Wright is a lawyer. He's not a fighter, unless you count court cases. But Phoenix Wright was just one of the funniest conclusions of all of Street Fighter history. I say Street Fighter by accident, I mean Capcom history. But just look at this. This matchup, this is actually played from the best Phoenix Wright player in the world, I Heart Justice. How fitting. Phoenix Wright is all about collecting clues and evidence. The more clues and evidence he collects, the more powerful he becomes. His most powerful form introduces this as his special, where he just yells at the opponents and it's just hilarious. Look, it's very obvious that this character was meant to just be a joke character. But the fact that there is a player who can make him work with other low tier characters like Doctor Strange is just hilarious. But it's also really fitting. I think that Phoenix Wright and Thanos really support the idea that low tiers can be memorable for their funny inclusions. But our next character is memorable for other reasons. Havoc from Mortal Kombat 1. Havoc is definitely a character I never thought we'd see again. Actually, before this game, I didn't even know who Havoc was. But Havoc is definitely a character who I personally think is very interesting. A character who can rip his body apart and just throw himself at other people literally. is just so fun. Now, he's considered a low tier character, but he's low tier for Mortal Kombat standards. That's not too bad. Unless we're talking Mortal Kombat 9, where the low tier characters are literally unplayable. But in Mortal Kombat 1, Havoc is considered not very good, at least when compared to the other low tier characters. However, Havoc is memorable for two reasons. Reason number one, he has one of the best moves in the game despite being one of the worst characters, which is very ironic. But the second reason is the fact that he takes two forgotten characters, Dyro and Havoc, and actually makes them into memorable characters. Rolls them into one and makes them just so amazing. I just wanted to mention Mortal Kombat somewhere on this list, but honestly, picking a low tier character was really hard because there wasn't really a character that was super bad, at least, that was super bad and yet was super memorable at the same time. So that should tell you just how well balanced the roster is. If Havoc is the worst character. But honestly, I think Havoc is just a very memorable and likable character. Mainly because he takes a character that everyone forgot about and brought him back into the spotlight. Normally, in Mortal Kombat standards, he would just be a cameo character. But for some reason, they decided to make him the main antagonist. And I love that. I love this. His inclusion in Mortal Kombat 1 was a great decision. And I am just so sad that characters like Su Hao will not be given this attention. We have one more character left to show, and this one's a little more personal. Little Mac from Super Smash Bros. I was gonna go over Ganondorf, but Bumbles McFumbles beat me to it and made a super good video, which I highly, highly recommend you check out. But Little Mac, personally, is my main in Super Smash Bros. I don't boot up Smash Bros. A lot, but whenever I do, I always pick Little Mac. Is this some sort of cruel masochism? Potentially, but I just love Little Mac's fighting style. He's a bit unorthodox, and yet he's super fun. He's all about getting up close and being in your face while smashing you to pieces. And once he gets there, it's hard for him to get out. Little Mac has great tools, fighting options, and most importantly, super strong attacks. He also has a lot of character because of Doc Lewis. Also, I just really like Punch-Out and I wanted another excuse to talk about that game. Now, why is he low tier? For the most part, he sounds really good. He even has a parry. Well, if you know Smash Brothers, you already know why. His attack stats are some of the best in the game, but his recovery is some of the worst. Now, in a normal fighting game, jumping doesn't matter too much, unless it's an anime fighting game. But in Smash Brothers, jumping and movement is the game's bread and butter. And while Lil Mac has a really fast movement speed, his jumping ability is, well, it's the worst in the game. This one stat reduced him to low tier status. And oftentimes you'll get laughed out of the room for picking this guy. But I never cared. When I first played Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, arguably Lil Mac's worst showing, I loved him. he was just a character that really clicked with me. And what's even better is that Little Mac is actually played competitively. Have you ever heard of Peanut? No, not the legume. I'm talking about the player, Peanut. One of the best players in Smash Brothers actually mains Lil Mac and does really well with him. And I think this is an ultimate showcase in why Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has some of the best balancing in gaming history. Because if a low tier character can win against high tier characters like Kazuya, then you know you've got some good balance. And ultimately, I think this is the final message that I want to send to anybody who says that low tier characters are unviable. Usually, that is not the case. I'm not saying it's never the case, but it's not always the case. Usually, low tier characters refer to characters that have to work a little bit harder for what they want, whilst high tier characters don't have to work that hard. But that doesn't mean that low tier characters cannot perform well. As we saw with Q, he can outmatch even his worst opponents. As we saw with Havoc, he has a great ability to come back from matches. And as we see here from Little Mac, his recovery is literally the only bad thing about him. And as we can see from other characters, they can be memorable for other reasons. So the message I want to send from this video is main whoever you want to main in a fighting game. Don't let tier lists dictate your life. Go out and try any character you wish. And if you like a character who just so happens to rank very low, then play that character. I don't care if people say Little Mac is bad. I will fight with him with my dying breath. Little Mac is a fun character who has great tools. All the other Smash Brothers characters are great, and I love fighting games now. I used to not like fighting games, but I gotten into them. I could talk about fighting games a little bit more, but for now I just want to say that low tier characters are spectacular characters, and you should not talk down to them just because they are characters who don't place well on a tier list. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I have been the Gamer Nerd, and thank you for watching.